Hello, everybody. Today we are going to discuss something about the relationship between language, literature, and culture. And that is why I have named this lecture as On Linking Language, Literature, and Culture. Friends, this is again going to be a long lecture, as you know, and once again, I would like to suggest you that you may go through it in certain installments. But do remember that this is the second lecture of my cultural studies series. And certainly, the first lecture was an introductory one. It is on culture. It was titled as What is Culture? In this second lecture, as I said, I'm going to discuss a bit about the relationship, the link between language, literature, and culture. In the in the third lecture, I'll be talking on an introduction of or presenting an introduction of cultural studies. So the third lecture, the forthcoming lecture, will be titled as What is Cultural Studies? But friends, right now let us ponder a bit about the relationship between language, literature, and culture. Let us once again look at culture and let us once again try to define it. But friends, here in this lecture, I'm going to define culture not in the same way as we defined earlier in the first lecture. Culture, my dear friends, is a very contested phenomenon, and it is understood to mean different things by different groups of people. Culture is an integrated pattern of human knowledge, beliefs, and behavior. Culture embodies language, it embodies ideas, it embodies beliefs, customs, taboos, codes, the different institutions. It also embodies tools, techniques, and also the works of art, and so on and so forth. Culture, you will agree, consists of shared values. It consists of shared beliefs, the knowledge that we share, the skills that we share, and the practices that we share. So, culture is consisting of shared values, beliefs, knowledge, skill, and practices that underpin behavior by members of a social group at a particular point of time. Culture is also about creative expression, it is also about skills, it is also about the traditional knowledge, and it is also about the resources that we possess. So it's a very broad term, and its length and breadth, it includes a lot of things. Let us list a few. What culture includes? Let us list a few. Culture includes art, craft, and design. Culture includes the oral and written history. It includes our oral and written literature. It has, or rather, it includes music, drama, dance, and our visual arts. It also includes our ceremonies and celebrations. It also comprises of indigenous knowledge of the biological and botanical properties that are around us, the herbs, the medicines, the medicinal plants, the medicinal applications, and knowledge of those medicinal plants and application and herbs, etc. It also includes architectural forms and the historic sites, the archaeology. It includes the traditional indigenous technologies that we have. It also includes that traditional healing methods which every society has. It also includes our traditional, or rather you can say the natural resources and the management of those natural resources. And it also includes the patterns, the very different kind of and a very complicated patterns of social interaction. Dear friends, it has been generally accepted that culture embodies the way humans live with others, and the way we treat others, and how we develop or react to changes in our environment. You will also agree, my dear friends, that culture is a very broad concept. It embraces all the aspects of human life. It includes everything that humans do or learn to do as members of the society. And culture shapes our thoughts and our actions. Furthermore, dear friends, culture has several meaning, but two are very major, two are very important, and this we talked in our previous lecture also, but I'm referring to it in a different way here, in a different manner here. One is called little C culture, and the other is called the big C culture. This little C culture is also called hearthstone culture, whereas the big C culture is also called the Olympian culture. What is this hearthstone or little C culture? Dear friends, it is this little C culture is where culture is defined as everything in human life. It is also called the BBV culture. It is also called the BBV culture. What is this BBV culture? B for belief, B for behavior, B for values. So this little C culture includes everything that is there in human life, and it is about beliefs, it is about behavior, it is about values. So it is also referred as the BBV culture. Whereas the Olympian culture or the big C culture is where the culture refers to what is best in human life. Look here, where the culture refers to what is best in human life. It is reflected to the elitist kind of culture, the elitist interpretation or the elitist way of looking at culture. So you may call it the elitist culture also. Friends, it is also called MLA culture. And what is this MLA? Music, literature, art. Dear friends, as I said earlier, that culture can mean different things to different people. and in a very different context. So, culture is connected to people with formal education, having high social status, elitist, or the people belonging to the higher strata of the society, those who are having the resources, those who are the educated ones, the developed ones. It is connected. Culture is connected with the people with formal education, with a high social status, like those who attend the high cultural events or the events of high cultural formats. For example, the Oprah Winfrey show. For example, those very famous literature festivals which are a trend nowadays. So this culture of literature festivals, this culture of Oprah Winfrey show, or this culture of a specific musical, elitist musical events, elitist literary poetic events, etc. This is the culture which is connected with the people of formal education, with the people of having high social status. Whereas, on the other hand, there is culture which is reduced to the meaning of food, holidays, lifestyle, the way of living, traditions, etc. etc. Dear friends, it is not restricted and limited to even these meanings only. Because culture is a very broad term, so we cannot restrict this and limit this to even these two meanings of culture belonging to the high educated class and the elitist class, that MLA music, literature, art culture, the big C culture, the Olympian culture, and the BBV, belief, behavior, values culture, the small C culture. We cannot restrict it and limit it to these meanings only, because culture is a combination of beliefs, customs, shared values, as well as it is a combination of our history, our geography, religion, and even our language. So it's a combination of beliefs, customs, shared values, as well as history, geography, religion, and even language that a specific group of people in a society share. A famous thinker and linguist, Yule, defines culture as a social knowledge that is unconsciously acquired by a group of individuals in the same society, where they share the same ideas, beliefs, and even their way of life. This is Yule defining culture. He defines it as a social knowledge that is unconsciously acquired. So look at this key word, the key phrase, unconsciously acquired by a group of individuals living in the same society, where they share the same ideas, beliefs, and even their way of life. Another thinker, Hinkle, claims that the term culture has many meanings that usually deal with forms of speech acts. And look here, language is coming. So Hinkle claims that the term culture has many meanings that usually deal with the forms of speech acts, rhetorical structures of discourses, society rules and conventions, and the knowledge constructs. So, culture is not an easy issue to answer. It is very vast and deep. Now, friends, let us come to literature, and let us try to understand first the definition of literature. Of course, in our literature classrooms, we are told by our teacher that there is not one but many definition of literature, and yes, our teachers are correct. But let us try to define a bit. Let us try to give some sort of a shape, a verbal shape to the definition, or rather, don't say definition, that our understanding of literature. So, dear friends, literature is understood in multiple ways. Literature is understood in multiple ways. It is a body of written or oral work, like novels, like poetry or drama, that use words to stimulate the imagination of the reader and provide him with a unique vision of life. So this can be one definition, this can be one understanding of literature. I repeat, it is a body of written or oral works like novel, poetry, drama, stories, that uses words to stimulate the imagination of the reader and to provide him with a unique vision of life. Let us look at literature in another way. It's a creative work. It is a global form of expression that addresses the spiritual, emotional, and intellectual human concerns. So this can be another way of looking at literature, that it is a creative work. It is the global way and the global form of expression, and it addresses the spiritual, emotional, and intellectual human concerns. Friends, literature is believed to demonstrate artistry and to have the power to raise questions and to generate debates. Literature provides new points of view, and it lets the reader expand his understanding to himself and to the whole world. And it also refreshes the spirit of the reader. Literature, it also refreshes the spirit of the reader. In addition to this, dear friends, literature is any factual, imaginative, and creative work about people's life and what they have done in their lives as an achievement, what they have believed, and what they have created or what they have thought to create. So that is also literature. Literature is a multitude of works that are written either in the form of a book, newspaper, magazine, spoken, acted, filmed, sung, or drawn as cartoons. So this can also be one way of looking at literature, that it is a multitude of works that are written in the form of books, newspapers, and magazines, that are spoken, recited, narrated, that are acted, filmed, televised, sung, or drawn as cartoons, the comics. So, in all these different aspects, literature portrays views about human life. It refers to the real visions of the human life, whether it is a positive vision of human life or a negative vision of human life, but certainly it portrays views about human life, and it talks about the real visions of human life. Further, literature can be lived through different varieties of the media. Dear friends, remember that literature requires media. Without media, we cannot have literature, we cannot at least convey literature. And what are the media that literature uses? The audio visual, the visual, and the print. So these are the different media that literature uses for its portrayal. So that's why I was saying that literature can be lived through different varieties of media. And I repeat, what are those different varieties of media? Audio visual, and even print. So you cannot imagine literature without this audio or visual or audio visual or print use of the media in it. Literature, dear friends, is an expression of culture. And why I am saying so? Because it conveys human knowledge, it conveys human beliefs, and it also conveys human behavior. So that is why since it conveys human knowledge, it conveys human beliefs, it conveys human behavior, so it is certainly an expression of culture. Literature is certainly an expression of culture. Now, dear friends, after defining literature in this way as an art, let us now look at literature in a linguistics with a linguistic point of view. What the linguists have to say about literature. Till now, we were talking about literature as an art, literature as something creative. Now, let us ponder over literature in a linguistic way. And when we start pondering over different approaches, or rather the different linguistic approaches of looking at literature, we must begin with a question. Of course, the very common question, what is literature? What is literature? And dear friends, you will agree with me that authors across languages, critics and scholars of literature, the exponents and experts of literature, even the theorizers of literature, and yes, the linguists also, they are puzzled over this question, what is literature? One broader understanding or one broader explanation of literature says that the literary texts are products that reflect different aspects of the society. And you will agree with this point that all those literary texts that we have around us, they are products that reflect the different aspects of the society. So, friends, the literary texts are documents. They are cultural documents which offer a deeper understanding of a society, of a country, of a nation, of a race, of a tribe, of a country, or a group of countries. So literature is a cultural document which offers a deeper understanding of a society, of a nation, of a country, of a race, of a tribe, or a group of tribes, or a group of countries. The very famous linguist, the renowned linguist Terry Eagleton, argues that there is no inherent quality to a literary text that makes it a literary text. Look here, And listen to this very carefully, what Eagleton is saying. And look at the contradiction here, look at the paradox here. Try to understand the paradox, try to crack this paradox. Eagleton argues that there is no inherent quality to a literary text that makes it a literary text. Rather, it is the interpretation that the reader gives to the text. So Eagleton says there is nothing as such meaningful and literary in the literary text. It is basically the reader, the understanding of the reader, the interpretation of the reader that makes it meaningful, that makes it literary or whatever. In a very simplistic way, literature means anything that is written. Of course, when I'm saying this, I am deliberately excluding the oral aspect of literature, but allow me to do this for some time. Literature simply, as I was saying, simply means anything that is written. Now, anything that is written means what? Even a brochure that you get while purchasing a car, a brochure that you get while purchasing a washing machine has also been referred as literature. The content of an advertisement has also been referred as literature. The brochure or that one page information that we get before undergoing a surgery is also referred as literature. So keeping this in mind, thus, we can divide literature into two: informative literature and imaginative literature. Informative literature is basically what? That deals with informations, facts, explanations, history, etc. Whereas imaginative literature, and dear friend, this is our concern, aims to arouse thoughts, imaginations, and even our feelings. So it is this imaginative literature which is our concern. And this imaginative literature aims to arouse our thoughts, imaginations, and feelings. The author expresses a hidden idea, or rather, he expresses the hidden ideas and feelings in an artistic way. He would not convey facts, but he basically tries to communicate with the reader by his emotions and feelings in a real artistic way and for the sake of art in general. Now friends, let us move on to another heading, another topic. Let us now look at the relationship between language and culture. We'll come back to literature and culture and its relationship once again, but let us now, for a while, let us talk about language and culture, the relationship between language and culture. Dear friends, the phenomena of language and culture are deeply related in many ways. Language is determined by culture and vice versa. Culture is also determined by language. So let us now try to look at that how culture determines language. Later on we will look at how language also tries to determine culture. But here let us look at that how culture determines language. And I would like to start with a phrase that our words determine our thoughts. Our words determine our thoughts. Friends, anthropologists view that language and its entire structure, or rather structures, were entirely dependent on the cultural context in which they exist. This is the opinion of the anthropologists, that they view language and its entire structures entirely dependent on the cultural context in which they exist. There is an anthropologist, Ray. He made a very interesting observation. He made an interesting study by giving color samples to different American Indian tribes, and he asked them to give the name of those colors. Friends, as a consequence of this experiment, he concluded that the spectrum we know as green, red, black, etc., is an arbitrary division, and each culture divides the spectrum separately. So, surely, my dear friends, there are ways in which cultures does really determine language. Our culture restrict sometimes our culture restrict what we can think about efficiently in our language. For example, some languages have only three color terms equivalent to black, white, and red. And a native speaker of this language, which has only a three color term, so a native speaker of this language would have a difficult time expressing the concept of, say for example, purple, say for example, green. Dear friends, let us look at language as a part of culture. And you will agree to my point that language is not just a medium for showing and introducing culture. Rather, it is surely a part of culture itself. Try to understand this. When you look at some immigrant in a foreign country, did you observe anything? Immigrants in foreign countries tend to speak their own first language between each other. Even though they are comfortable using the language of that specific country in which they are living at present, they can use that language, they can understand that language, they can talk and converse in that language. But the immigrants living in a foreign country, they tend to speak their first language between each other, even if they feel comfortable using that foreign language. They prefer talking in their first language. Why? Because they always want to preserve their own legacy, their own culture. So they want to preserve their own legacy that includes custom, tradition, the culture, language, celebrations, and whatnot. So linguistic differences are also seen as mark of another culture. So Once you notice a linguistic difference, observe, and you will come to the conclusion certainly that you may find cultural differences also. So linguistic differences are bound to have some cultural differences also. So linguistic differences are also seen as the mark of another culture. This may create divisiveness among neighboring people, among people belonging to different groups in the same area. For example, if you notice the Urdu speaking culture in Chennai, for example, or the Urdu Hindi speaking culture in England, for example, the Urdu Hindi speaking culture in America, for example, Canada, for example, or the Hindi speaking culture in, say, for example, Meghalaya. So linguistic differences are also seen as mark of another culture, and it may create divisiveness among neighboring people or between different groups in the same area. For instance, take the example of the two Englishes that are being practiced in America. Yes, there may be several Englishes rather, but I would like to refer to the two different Englishes that are spoken in America. One is the English which you call the standard American English spoken by the whites, and the other is the African American English. So this standard American English is spoken by the whites, and the second, that is the African American English, is spoken by the African Americans, as you know. And don't you notice a huge difference among these two dialects or among these two variety of English there in America? They, my dear friends, they embody two separate cultural worldviews. These two varieties of English spoken in America embody two very separate cultural worldviews. Dear friends, you will agree that this issue is present in almost all over the world, where we find two or more groups living in the same country for centuries and emanate from the same origin sometimes, but they speak different languages, and it is because of this that they speak different languages, there is a different cultural context. Now friends, let us come back to literature and culture. Let us now ponder over the relationship between literature and culture. Literature is seen as a reflection of culture and society, portraying people's ideas and dreams set in certain time and space frameworks in the most creative and imaginative way. And literature depicts and it inspires. It does both these things. It both depicts and it inspires social changes, and is often treated as a very credible source of cultural representation. Literature is a very credible source of cultural representation. So, dear friends, literature is a valuable source of cultural knowledge precisely because it does present a personal interpretation of the life and values as the author of the literary work experiences these things. So, dear friends, literature and culture are deeply interrelated, and both have a strong relationship with each other, because during years and from the oldest of the times, literature has embodied culture. Do you remember a literary text from the Old English times, from the period of Old English language, the Anglo-Saxon times? A text, can you remember that? A text that substantially conveys the cultural context of life in England during the Old English times. Yes, you're right, my dear friends. I'm talking about Beowulf, that very great heroic poem belonging to the Anglo-Saxon literature. Beowulf in the Old English literature displays the actual history of ancient Old English period in which the heroes went on campaigns fighting against the devils or bad things and finally returning home with glories. And dear friends, can you remember the 12th century English literature, the medieval English literature? The new form of English that came into that time, the Middle English, evolved during the Middle English period, and the literature that came out of it, the Middle English literature, the medieval English literature, you must have read it, you must know this, that we divide the Middle English literature into three categories. We find religious literature there in the medieval times. We find courtly literature there in the medieval times. And we also find those Arthurian legends, those Arthurian literary texts belonging to the Middle English period. And all these texts, the medieval English text, do they not reflect the culture, the society of their time? And their students, when you come to England during the Middle English period once again, and when you recall that the literature written in England during the Middle English period reflects fairly accurately the changing fortunes of English, that earlier it was French ruling over English with the Anglo-Norman conquest. French dominated the scenario in the 11th, 12th, 13th century, and then English shot back. English came back. So French language was best understood by the upper class medieval English society. The books that upper class medieval English society read or even attended or written or even listened to were all in French. Whereas the mass, the commoners in England during the medieval times, they had their own vernacular English. And Geoffrey Chaucer was their most significant Middle English writer. And can you remember Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales? Don't you think that The Canterbury Tales is a very good specimen of cultural representation, the recording of cultural aspects of medieval England? Yes, it reflects diverse views of the church in England, for example. After the Black Death, many people began to question the Church of England, and even they started new monastic orders. So we find several characters in the Canterbury Tales that are of religious natures, religious figures. And even the very setting of the pilgrimage to Canterbury, around which the whole Canterbury Tale is woven, it shows the religious and other significant cultural themes and other significant cultural contexts of England. So in short, literature stands as a voice that expresses values and beliefs and it shows how people live as individual or as group, and how their cultural life was, and how their culture and traditions used to be. So literature gives us a great opportunity. As a reader, it gives us a great opportunity to increase our worldview, as we will have access to a variety of context through a variety of texts. So by having this access to a variety of contexts through a variety of texts, literature gives us an opportunity to increase and develop our worldview. Now, dear friends, let us move on once again to language and culture. And now let us talk about the interrelationship between culture and language. Since the year 1990, yes, very recently, since 1990, different scholars have dealt with this relationship between language and culture. There is one scholar, Risarger, Risarger. So this Risarger in the year 2006 considers culture as as a component and a part that cannot be separated from language. Risarger considers culture as a component and as a part that cannot be separated from language. She says, rather, she adds that linguistic production and practice is a way of cultural practice, since language is always embedded in culture. Cramsh. Cramsh is another scholar who relates language to identity. Language by Cramsh has been related to is being related to identity. So look here what she says. She relates language to identity and culture. She relates language to human identity and culture. She believes that there is a natural connection between the speaker's language and his identity. In other words, the accent and the vocabulary that the speakers are identified to a given speech community. Speakers draw a social importance, pride, historical and cultural unity by using the same language as the group that they belong to. So we take pride in the language we use. And we are conscious about its social importance, its pride, its historical and cultural unity. So I repeat what she says, what Cramsh says. She says that there is a natural connection between a speaker's language and their identity. In other words, by their accent and by their vocabulary, the speakers are identified to a given speech community. Now, when you listen to somebody speaking, by the way he or she is speaking, by his or her pronunciation, by his or her accent, by his or her sentence structures, you can identify that he or she belongs to a particular, a specific given speech community. And speakers take pride. They draw a social importance in it. They take pride in it. They look at it as their historical and cultural unity, that they're using the same language as a group that they belong to. Byram is another scholar, Byram, in the year 1989, he believes that language is a tool to express speakers' knowledge and perception of the real world. So look here, language as a tool to express speakers' knowledge and perception of the real world. So it reflects, language reflects their cultural concepts, the cultural concepts and values of the speaker. Byron goes on to say that one cannot learn a language and neglect its culture. One cannot learn language and neglects its culture. Because speaking a language means expressing its culture. So time and again, even in my classroom, I have been always emphasizing that when you are studying English as a language, when you are studying English as your literature, it is very important for you to try to learn and understand the culture of this language also, the culture of this literature also. So here is Byron saying that one cannot learn a language and neglect its culture, because speaking a language means expressing its culture. And Byron says that exchanging a language represents a particular way of thinking and living. When we are exchanging our views, when I'm talking to you in our, say for example, native tongue, so exchanging in a language represents a particular way of thinking and living. So language is bound up with culture in different ways. So let us look at one or two aspects how language is bound up with culture. First, language expresses a speaker's belief, his point of view, and his perception or assumption about the real world. So it is in this way language is bound up with culture, because it expresses the speaker's belief, point of view, and assumptions about the real world. People of the same group utter words which express common experiences, and that is why we can say they refer to facts, events, and ideas that are shared and known among the same social group. In addition, the languages people speak reflect their attitudes and beliefs also. Coming to the second point, that how language is bound up in culture, the second point is that members of the same social group create experience through language. Members of the same social group create experience through language. They give meaning to it through the way they interact with each other, either with their verbal aspects like the face-to-face conversations, speaking on the phone, or even the non-verbal ones such as gestures and body language. So, for instance, the way sending an email or message creates meaning that members of the same society can understand, because language always embodies cultural reality. Let us come to the third point, that how language is bound up with culture. That language itself is seen as cultural value. In fact, it is through language that speakers identify themselves as members of the same social group having the same culture. So, my dear friends, simply and very conventionally, language is the mirror of any society which reflects all its characteristics. Gramsci puts three links between language and culture, and he puts these three links this way. When Gramsci is talking about or seeing at three links between language and culture, he puts it like this way. He summarized it as follows. 1. Language expresses cultural reality. So look at the word expresses. Language expresses cultural reality. 2. Language embodies cultural reality. So mark the word embodies. Language embodies cultural reality. 3. Language symbolizes cultural reality. Again, mark the word symbolizes. So language symbolizes cultural reality. So these are the three things, these are the 3 points, these are the 3 links which Gramsci puts while talking about the relationship between language and culture. Language expresses cultural reality, language embodies cultural reality, and language symbolizes cultural reality. My dear friends, there is a sociolinguist named Fishman. He says that language is an inseparable part of culture because it is impossible to ignore the place of language in a given culture. So friends, therefore, in order to understand a given culture, it is crucial to study its language. Fishman also says that language reveals the way of thinking. It also reveals the norms which are common in that culture. And finally, Fishman says he considers language as a symbol of culture. That is, that language can be considered as a symbol to defend or attack or encourage or reject the culture associated with it. Fishman summarizes the relationship between language and culture as follows. And again, 3 summaries. So 3 points again. Fishman is summarizing the relationship between language and culture in 3 different ways. Language as a part of culture. So mark at the word part. Language as a part of culture. Language as an index of culture. And language as symbolic of culture. So language as part of culture, language as index of culture, language as symbolic of culture. However, the most influential scholars that deal with the issue of language and culture are Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf. You must have heard about these 2 fellows and that very famous Sapir and Whorf theory. So according to these fellows, according to Sapir and Whorf theory, people from different culture think differently and so they perceive the world in a different way. For example, Sapir and Whorf took a study or they undertook a study of the Eskimo community and they came to the conclusion that they are different from the English people. Their worldview is different from the worldview of the English people because for example, the Sapir and Whorf says that for a word like snow, they have different terminologies. They are very rich in the terminologies related to a snow. So they have a very different word for the snow on the ground. They have a very different word for the snow in the air. They have a very different word for the snow on the tree leaves. Whereas in English culture, they have only one. In English language, they have only one, and that is a snow. Similarly, some of you may know that in our Urdu or Hindi language, the word for camel is, oont. In English, camel is camel, and we have only one word for this particular specific animal. But those who know Arabic must agree with me that the language has 40 or even more than 40 words for camel in it, in its vocabulary. So Sapir and Whorf say that the communities perceive the world in a different way because of their language. So language obliges the speech community and it restricts their worldview, or rather it decides their worldview. Now there is a question that how language shapes the way we think. How language shapes the way we think. And is it really true that language shapes the way we think? This question, my dear friends, has been asked time and again. Linguists have been focusing and paying special attention to it since 1940s. When in the 1940s, Benjamin Lee Whorf, we were talking about him earlier. So in the 1940s, Benjamin Lee Whorf studied Hopi, H-O-P-I, a Native American language that is spoken in northeastern Arizona. And according to his studies, Whorf claimed that the speaker of Hopi and the speakers of English see the world differently because of their language differences. But, my dear friends, the answer to this question is not so easy. It's very complicated. Are we really unable to think about things which we don't have words for? Or we cannot find words for them because we don't think about them? Simply, you know the answer. So, it's a very complicated question. And are we not able to think about things we don't have words for? We are capable of thinking even about those things also, imagining about those things also, feeling about those things also, for which we don't have a word in our language. Or can we not find words for them because we don't think about them? Certainly not. This is not the case. So it's a very complicated thing. Part of the problem is that there is more an involvement of culture than just language. There is more an involvement of culture in it than just language. Our culture, that is to say, the beliefs, the traditions, the lifestyle, the habit, actions, and so on that we grasp from the people we live and interact with, shapes the way we think. It also shapes the way we talk. So objects are also treated differently by the syntax of different languages. For example, in English, there are some nouns that are countable. For example, potato. And plural can be made out of it. Potatoes. There are certain mass nouns that are uncountable ones. And no plurals can be made out of those nouns. For example, rice. So you cannot have rices. You can say a cup of rice, but you cannot say two rices. Whereas other languages, for example, Chinese, don't make this distinction. Instead, classifiers like cup of are used for all nouns. Researchers are studying and pondering over this idea whether this property of the language makes English speakers more aware of the distinction between individual objects and substances. So this is matter of great research and great ponderings. So it seems likely that language, thought, and culture form three channels of a chain. Three channels of a chain. And what are those three channels of a chain? Language, thought, and culture form three channels of a chain, with each one affecting the other. Each channel of this chain affect the other. Furthermore, my dear friends, it is possible to think about something even if we don't have a word for it. Take the colors, for example. There are an infinite number of different colors, and we cannot find names for all of them because the color spectrum is continuous and it is very vast. It is like a continuum, whereas the language or our language is not continuous. Our language makes us break the color spectrum into red, orange, black, green, and so on. Moreover, the people of New Guinea have only two basic color terms in their language. One for dark colors, including blue and green, and the other for light colors, for example, yellow and red. So the people of New Guinea have only two basic color terms in their language, one for dark colors and one for light colors. So their language breaks up the color spectrum differently from ours. But that does not necessarily mean that they cannot see the difference between a yellow and a blue, or the difference between a red and a yellow. Studies have shown, my dear friends, that they can see the different colors just as the English speakers can see. So, our language does not force us to see only what it gives us word for. It can, but yes, it can certainly affect how we put things into groups. So it does not limit us to think about those things for which we do not have a word in our language. But certainly it does affect that how we put things into groups. So the influence of language is not so much on what we can think about, but rather on how we break up into reality, into categories, and how we label them. And in this, our language and our thoughts are probably both greatly influenced by our culture. Friends, let us come back once again to literature. Literature, my dear friends, is considered as a rich source of authentic material because it transfers two features in its written text. Listen to me carefully. Literature is considered as a rich source of authentic material because it transfers two features in its written text. First one is language is in use. First is language in use, and the second is an aesthetic representation of the spoken language, which is meant to represent language within a certain cultural context. Literary works of authors like Joseph Conrad or Mark Twain convey the way language is spoken in certain geopolitical context. So I hope some of you are aware about the writings of Joseph Conrad and Mark Twain, and they are written in a specific colonial European, and in case of Conrad, and that typical Mississippi cultural context in case of Mark Twain. So literary works of these authors and authors like Conrad, authors like Mark Twain, they convey the way language is spoken in certain geopolitical context. The literary text provides a diversity of information regarding the geographical location of the portrayed culture. The literary text provides a diversity of information regarding the geographical location of the culture which is being portrayed in that text. So readers, while reading that text, get an idea about the story and its historical background and even the way of life that took place at that time. So they develop an insight into that country. They develop an insight into that region. They develop an insight into that geographical part of the world. And they also develop an insight into that culture. So reading a text emphasizes on the description of architecture, for example, weather, for example, dress, for example, decoration, for example, customs, for example, traditions, for example, and other things. So reading a text emphasizes on the descriptions of architecture, weather, dress, habits, decorations, customs, traditions, the way of living, and other things. So in which it helps the reader to enhance the cultural insight. And that literary text helps the reader to enhance his cultural insight. Reading a literary text helps the reader make a connection between the culture implied in that text. And it also helps the reader to refer to, or to rather a kind of a kind of a comparison between the implied culture that is there in that literary text and our own culture. So stories were in the past and they are still having massive and central importance to human life. Right from the beginning of the history of civilization of mankind, these stories are always having a very massive and central importance to human life since its beginning. Undisputedly, cultures were built on stories, tales, histories, myths, legends, religious stories, etc., etc. Literature was, my dear friend, and literature is, my dear friend, is still providing cultural and intellectual awareness, especially in this era of imperialism, capitalism, industrialization, globalization. So literature is still providing a cultural and intellectual food for thought. Literature is still providing cultural and intellectual awareness in this era of imperialism and capitalism and industrialization and globalization. Nowadays, since literature deals with universal concerns and as well as also the individual concerns, so there is a growing need to grab on literature as an input source. Literature deals with the universal concepts of love, hatred, death, nature, traditions, values, and of course other elements that are common to all languages and different cultures. So where the difference, similarity, and even the relationship between different cultures, languages, it can expand our understanding for life and enrich our vision of the whole world. So cultural features depicted in literary texts are also named as culture specific elements or expressions. And they have been an area of interest for the literature enthusiasts and also the researchers. One such researcher is Gillian Lazar. And this Gillian Lazar defined cultural features as objects or projects that exist in one society but not in another. That is, cultural features are specific to one culture. This is what Gillian Lazar says. Cultural features are specific to one culture and they stand out from another one. She also identified the certain elements, certain aspects as being the cultural features that can be found in literary texts. And what are those elements that can be found in literary text according to Gillian Lazar? Let us identify some, which Gillian Lazar identified as something, the features, the cultural features that can be found in literary texts. So what are those cultural features? Proverbs, idioms, formulaic expressions, social structures, role and relationship, customs, rituals, traditions, festivals, beliefs, values, superstitions, political, historic and economic backgrounds, institutions, taboos, metaphorical and connotative meanings, humor. These are the elements, these are the cultural elements that can be found in literature. So the study of culture features in literary texts. When all of us are studying a literary text, we are actually studying culture. So the study of culture is embedded in a literary study. The study of culture features in literary texts. It promotes, do remember, it promotes, and it is very important, it is very valuable that it promotes intercultural understanding. So look here how it is important and why it is important. It promotes intercultural understanding. So literary texts help avoid culture stereotyping that can occur when discussing cross-cultural differences. So thinking critically about cross-cultural issues might increase the reader's intercultural awareness and open his or her perception to different worlds. So my dear friends, if we are able to understand the world of Shakespeare, if we are able to understand the world of, say for example, Ghalib, if we are able to understand the world of, say for example, Henrik Ibsen, if we are able to understand the worldview of Najib Mahfouz or Pablo Neruda, it is because of the understanding and the reading and the what you can say, the understanding of those literary texts, that it enables us for an intracultural and for an intercultural understanding. Thank you very much.